What's up, hobby friends? This video is a clip from the full-length tutorial on my Patreon for painting Captain Sam Wilson, and shows how I painted the iconic Captain America shield. The bottle has been primed with Vallejo Surface Primer Black. The colors for the non-monomodal red are AK Tenebris Gray, scaled colors African Shadow, AK Dark Shadow Flesh, Carmine, Dead Red, and White. For the non-monomodal white, it's AK Ash Gray, Graphite, Pale Gray, Greenish White, and White. I had originally wanted to use Pale Sand, but I ended up cutting the color from the recipe. For the non-monomodal blue, it's AK Dark Sea Blue, Light Prussian Blue, Aquatic Turquoise, and scaled colors Pale Skin. So to paint the shield, it's the same core concept as painting the non-metal model on the wings, but we're going to spend a little bit more time both in mapping out the placement of our lights and shadows and also pushing the values a little bit more. I want the shield to be a lot more reflective, a lot shinier, almost to have a sort of satin finish compared to even what we have on the wings and the backpack. So I started to map it out. I've done Tenebris Gray for the red rings. I've done Ash Gray for the white ring and the star. And I've done AK's Dark Sea Blue for the blue element. So we're going to do the blue first, then the red, and then the white. But the placement of the highlights and shadows is uniform across. It's important when you're painting the shield like this to remember that you have to treat the entire thing as one surface. And even though all these different elements are embossed or recessed, the entire shield is one. It's effectively a sphere, albeit a sphere that's sort of really bulged out in a larger area. So the first thing we need to consider when we're mapping out and planning out the highlights and shadows is that this is essentially a sphere. We're going to have a strong light here. Hope you can see the most. I just have water on my brush. Strong highlight here. A secondary highlight here. The terminator right here. And then we're going to have some tertiary lines. And I say lines, it's more like little highlights here and probably here. And even though also that we're going to be highlighting and painting each of these bands individually, we should keep it consistent across the entire shield. So it's important at the very beginning to understand and map out and know sort of where you're going to be placing your values. So we'll start with the blue. And the recipe for this, it's the same as on the rest of the figure. So on the blue, we're using light Prussian blue, the aquatic turquoise, and then we're going to go to pale skin, and then into maybe it's a touch of white depending on how bright the pale skin ends up being. For the red, it's the same as the wings. So we have our African Shadow, Carmine. We're going to have, Dark Shadow Flesh is in there, Carmine, Dead Red, and then White. And then for the white, it's going to be Ash Gray, Graphite, Pale Gray, and maybe I'll introduce a bit of greenish white before going into white. We'll skip the pale sands. So we'll start with the blue. And roughly map out. And if you've seen my other video on Captain Carter, this is essentially the same thing. It's the same core concept in terms of the technique, placement of lights and shadows. It's just on this figure because it's not quite as central. The light is coming away and it's catching mostly here. We have to think through the highlights and shadows a little differently. And I thought it would be useful to demonstrate on this particular figure just how to approach it. Now, because I want the highlights down here to be stronger on the bottom, the blue right here, because it's going to sit very close to the terminator, is going to be close to my darkest value, which would be that white Prussian blue with a bit of dark sea blue. And I'm really only keeping some highlights on the edges here to represent sort of the different bandings, creating some reflections into each other and the surrounding areas. We're then going to continue into the red. We'll start with a bit of tenebrous gray just to touch up any sort of overpaint from the blue. So we're going to jump straight into the African shadow. Just like we were doing with the wings, we're going to map out the brightest half of the shield. And not to worry with the white. I know I'm going to be overpainting a little bit messy, but we'll clean up with the white. And much like with the suit, the reason I'm doing this is because I think I don't want to risk overpainting onto white when painting the red because it's much, much harder to clean up. If I do the red first, I can afford to be messy. And then when I paint the white, if I overpaint onto the red, I think it's much easier to clean up than vice versa. Okay, so that's our bright area. And then I want to introduce a couple of secondary bands down here. Yeah. Here. And avoid making them too uniform. If you do the bands too evenly spaced and very mechanically, it ends up looking very false. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave some of that tenebrous gray for some of the deeper shadow. And I'm using my African shadow to edge line a bit of the edges as well. And this is sort of a similar idea to when we were painting the wings. The shield itself has these embossed edges where light will catch along the edge and create a reflected light source into all the edges and surfaces adjacent to it. And jump right into our dark shadow flush, and we'll start working on the bright areas of the bright spot. And I'm choosing to display this in real time. I know it may get a little boring. Painting on this front to back on the shield, but on this model and on a model like Captain America, for example, I think the shield forms the core identity. It forms the core look of the model. And I think it's crucially important to get it right. I don't think it would be genuine to skip through, much like I might do some of the other areas of the model, because there is so much to the shield. It's not just about, oh, we're going to use these colors and we'll place a highlight here or we'll place a shadow there. but I want to show you how I'm approaching it in real time, and then maybe explain sort of why I'm thinking, the way I'm thinking in terms of how I'm deciding where to place my highlights, how I'm adjusting. So right here, for example, I'm finding these dark bands a little bit too uniform, and so I'm using my dark shadow flesh tone just to mix it up a little bit. While still trying to maintain that tenuous gray shadow. Remember, you have to keep your highlights consistent across all the bands. So where you have one strong highlight line going through, you need to carry it across. Now, as we start to get into the carmine, we'll start with the top. The top is fairly straightforward. We're going to start to really focus and hone in on a larger band or highlight right here. And maybe a couple secondary highlights here. And there. And you can see where I'm beginning to establish that really bright spot that's going to be on the shield. And then when it gets to the bottom or the bottom half of the shield, we're going to get some reflected light off of the wings as well as from the environment around. So I'm going to do a highlight from the bottom edge here. And because the shield, it's not just an even sphere, but there is a bit of a drop to the edge. This bottom part, I think, will catch a stronger highlight that quickly reduces, disappears. But then because this top edge, it's more directly facing towards our light source, we're going to get a edge highlight right here. I'm going to catch, I think, some strong edge highlights, especially on this curve right here, and this curve right here. And the outer curve right here. Be careful when you're painting this part of the shield not to overpaint onto the suit underneath. This area is looking a little dark, so I'm just going to do a soft glaze of the carmine just to brighten it up, because I expect to take this part of the shield much, much brighter. carmine into dead red. So again, remember we're reinforcing the bands across all of the segments of the shield. So where you have sort of one highlighting sort of curve that's happening, you have to keep it consistent. So as I'm painting the shield and as I'm visualizing sort of what I'm seeing on the model, I'm noticing that this part right here is a little too dark. I want this to be a much stronger point of highlighting. So I need to brighten up here and here. I'm going to use some glazes of the carmine and the dead red. And then similarly, this spot right here, I feel it should be a little brighter. And we'll adjust this inner band to match. I want the highlight band that runs curvature right here to be much more noticeable, so I'm going to push this dead red highlight a little bit more. And then we're hoping to get a bit of a highlighting bounce from the wing right here as well. So I'm going to put a little spot right there. And we'll push our highlight from dead red into pure white. Do very soft transitions here. Mix your color progressively. Don't try and push the white too strong, too quickly. Now, as we push the highlight closer into the white, I'm going to be focusing it more like a little circle right here. So I don't want to bring that highlight all the way down to the center of the shield because our values in the blue also don't match how bright that's going to be. And a little bit of a bright spot here from the shield and the wing. And as we continue to highlight up, we're constantly adjusting the values of highlights around. In particular, the edge highlights when we're running around the inside. Because I expect this to have a strong, this area right here, to have a strong white highlight. I need this inner reflection here to also be bright. Not quite white, but bright enough to continue that illusion of the strength of the highlight. I'll put a bit of a white matte reflective highlight here as well. And then to smooth out some of these blends, you just go in with some mixes of your carmine, your dead red, even your dark shadow flush. And we're just going to smooth out some of these blends. Maybe do some finer tweaking of the values. You can see that by glazing in the brighter color over darker color, we just subtly shift it and brighten it up a little bit. And then we can do the opposite by darkening something by putting a darker color on top of a brightened color. You also want to make sure that you get some of this red on the underside of the shield because the rim does travel and focus around a little bit. So we're just going to take, starting with our dark shadow flesh, we'll do a base coat. And then where appropriate, we'll highlight a little bit with a carmine or dead red. And the last part that we're going to be working on is the white. Now you can see that I've already used some Tenebris spray just to touch up the edge of the shield, just reline the inner rim. And we're going to approach the white just the same way as we did the red and the blue. And because we already have a lot of our highlights already mapped out on the shield, it's just a matter of working through the colors and basically applying our lights and shadows to match. So now we're going to be using the ash gray, graphite, pale gray, greenish white, and then white. So jump straight into this graphite. Now you just have to take a little bit of care here not to overpaint onto any of the red areas and to maintain that black line near the edge. So I don't think there's much talking to really be had here. I will run the clip ahead in maybe 1.5 or 2 times speed so you can sort of see how I'm painting it, but essentially we're going to continue and carry across the highlighting that we already established with the red. The last thing I want to say is continuously make sure that you are carrying these highlight bands across. And where you have bright bands running across one area of the shield, carried across all the different sections. So here, we want a bright band running across, a dark consistently across. So here we have the shield pretty much blended up, and if you watch sort of the runtime of me blending up the white and then doing some touch-ups on the red, you'll also see that I was continuously adjusting some of the values, particularly in the red on this section here. I was glazing, and apparently still am, just a little bit more of that white highlight in there will really sell this bright spot on the shield. However, because the majority of the shield, especially the midtones, sits in this gorgeous carmine and dead red, even into sort of this tenebrous gray or the African shadow mix here, that the shield still looks red despite going up to pure white here. What I want to do is just take a little bit of Games Workshop contrast red, and I just want to do some glazes in some of these deepest parts of the shield, and just push the redness of that tone. And then by glazing it over the pink a little bit, we just knock back some of that pastel color and saturate it a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is, because I still have some tenebrous gray loaded into my airbrush from before, I'm just going to gently focus some of the shadowing on the bottom half of the shield. Just to reinforce the shadow a little bit. And then finally, for the extra bit of polish, what we're going to do is we're going to do some specular highlighting. So we're going to take our pure white and we're just going to add some dots of color. One, where I'm going to have, or I want to have some, that I'm going to call them pings, where we have these points of light catching from surrounding objects. So what do I mean by that? The star, for example. I'm going to put a sharp white dot on this corner right here. And that's because I expect the highlight to be catching, bouncing off of some of these areas around, and then on the adjacent part where the stars meet, especially on this side of the shield. Maybe I'll mix a bit of carmine for this one to knock it back a bit. And then because we have to keep it consistent, right? Keep those bands going. Carry it through. Maybe I want to put a dot here to correspond with that band of highlight that's happening right here. And then we'll just add a couple of random ones where it's feeling a little sparse just to balance it out. Get that shine happening on the edges here. once again, trying not to be too uniform with these spots. You want to just spread them out so that they're not evenly spaced. It can end up looking like a pizza pie if your highlights of any kind start to become evenly spaced across the shield. So you want to make sure that the patterning, that you vary the width of the bands, you vary the placement of these pings or these spot highlights to mix that up and create that variety. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, make sure you give it a like and subscribe for more awesome weekly content. If you want to check out the full-length video for Captain Sam, as well as many others, you can go check out my Patreon. I'll make sure to have a link in the video description below, and you can follow my Instagram as well, link down below. As always, until next time, happy hobbying.